Throughout the main character's adventure, there's always going to be that one figure that's an absolute go-getter. One that doesn't like sitting on the sidelines and just being a cheerleader, but actually being in the middle of the action to help out as much as possible, either through really getting their hands dirty or commanding the players out on the field like a captain. Within the story of Radiant, that role falls upon the kick-ass, courageous wizard knight and princess of Sanfandir, Ocoho. Immediately going into Ocoho's design, it's one of my favorites in the series. She's the pure example of pretty much everything from head to toe having a meaning and reason to the outfit. Being a part of the Wizard Knights unit, she of course wears the standard outfit, but she still has her own symbol that makes her stand out with the knee pads. I'll get into that later. But I think my favorite thing is the long French braid. It serves two purposes. The first one is more or less admiration for the queen, as Queen Budokai has two braids herself, and Ocoho definitely looks up to her as a role model and fan, and not just because of the size difference that does wonders for some people out there. That cat was onto something. And the second reason will be relevant later. Though, for a quick fun fact, the inspiration for it, design-wise, was from Janelle Monáe and Jadeda's music video, Yoga, and then Valente added his own spin to it. Good call, this man has refined taste. From minute one that Ocoho is introduced into the story, she's already shown to have a fast-paced attitude. A dull moment is terrible, always wanting to keep things moving and keep the action flowing. And speaking of flowing, given her position of wanting to be a great wizard knight, a lord someday even, she's already capable of wielding a handful of spells when her unit is in charge of taking care of a spectrum nemesis. She's easily able to do a lot for a wizard of her status, and that's because she surprisingly has an easy grasp of Fantasia in general. She's capable of using multiple spells at once, or from the fact that out of the main group, she was able to understand and use the Cid just from seeing other people use it with no real explanation until afterwards. She's able to create confinement spells, barriers, and a spell that definitely separates her from the other wizard knights. Most wizards that hunt nemesis that are introduced in the story tell us, the reader, that you can't go wrong with these three items: gloves, a feather sword, and a wand. For melee, a wand is how she channels her Fantasia and spells. For more skilled and veteran sorcerers, they usually use a feather sword of some kind to deal with their opponents. Well, for Ocoho, she channels her Fantasia through these skull knee pads. Sounds cool and weird at the same time, go with me on this. She can't shoot fire from them, at least not yet, but she can fire the skulls themselves and have them attack the enemy for her while she's occupied doing something else. It reminds me of Punchline's main ability from DMC5, similar mechanic. Though what's interesting to me is how she moves while attacking with the knee pads. Her focus point of Fantasia is that of her knees, of course, so a lot of her attacks are going to be more physical, and it makes me think of two possibilities where the inspiration is from. Now, quite frankly, it's not said outright or even really hinted at in the slightest of where it's actually from, so what I have to say for this next bit is a lot of speculation and headcanon, but these are the closest connections I could find. The first is with Ocoho's style of being geared towards knees and leg-based attacks. The style is somewhat comparable to that of Muay Thai, a martial art that has emphasis on striking your opponent with fists, elbows, shins, and of course, kicks and knee hits. Now, you could be thinking, well, that just sounds like every other martial art. Well, specifically, Muay Thai was originally known as the art of 8 limbs because it pretty much uses your whole body, and the whole purpose and practice of the art is to use your entire body as a weapon. Throughout the series, Ocoho is without the most physical fighter in character. The way she throws her entire being into the enemy to overwhelm them with finesse and skill is what gives credence to this. And continuing with the Muay Thai connection, its training regimen is said to be one of the harder, if not the hardest martial art workouts, because there's a lot of stamina that's needed for all that kicking and making sure your shins don't give out on you. Fuck! Ocoho is the only other character so far from over 100 chapters that we've seen put in any amount of effort into training or practicing her techniques. Not counting Seth, of course, because, you know, he's the main character. That was the first idea. The second inspiration could easily just be Sanji's Blackleg style from One Piece. Mr. Valente isn't afraid to admit that One Piece is a favorite of his, and you can absolutely see where the ideas come from. Hell, I've just straight up said that Doc is basically just Usopp. So the possibility of a character's fighting style being influential to another character is not totally far-fetched. Or maybe I'm just looking too deep into this and she just fights that way because it looks cool. The end. Now the crazy part is, after all of that, that's not even her defining ability. You see, when you're a wizard knight, when it comes to taking down boss-like entities known as nemesis, it would be really great if everyone could always be on the same page and work together with perfect synergy. Well, that's where the spell Gessoni takes center stage. Gessoni is Welsh for harmonize, which is the perfect word and action that's need to be done for threats on a large scale. Gessoni mentally links people together so commands can be transferred within the time of a literal thought. The person who initiates the Gessoni will be in command of those who are under the spell. This is great, so the person in charge doesn't have to worry about any communication problems. And the Wizard Knights rely on this technique and tactic so much so that some of the lords, the guys who are in charge of the set amount of people, think that it's almost impossible to slay a spectrum without it. Now, what's really cool is when everything was nearly being burned to dust, Ocoho managed to slaughter about 5 to 6 nemesis on her own with the techniques I already told you about, and then with one huge burst of Fantasia and willpower, she was able to command all members of the squad with Gessoni. That's about 20 to 30 people. She did all of that by herself. That's pretty fucking awesome. This panel right here is one of my favorites of her, because it's one of the most defining moments for her as a character, and it shows you who she is. Hell, if you allow me to geek out for a quick minute, this chapter is when she does this, and it's the moment I fully became invested in Radiant as a whole. It certainly caught my interest, and I wanted to know more and how things were going to unfold. Later on, when things were getting chaotic during the war, she managed to set everything back on track, and because of her actions and being firm on her decisions, she didn't earn the spot of becoming a lord to the Wizard Knights, but a princess to the throne who commands all of them. Now, despite being more large and in charge than a woman who's a giant, Ocoho is able to wield Fantasia, which means she does have an infection of some kind. Her infection is a mole behind her right ear, which is the second purpose of her braid. It's to hide it, so no one can see it, and as such, not many people are aware about it. The pure irony of having her main ability of commanding people, her infection is when anyone touches her mole, she becomes susceptible to orders herself. Because of this manipulation, she was forced to undertake the role of the Dolian. A Dolian hails from Irish mythology, where it's mostly known as the Headless Fairy, a very deadly and creepy fairy. Boom! But it's basically the European version of the Headless Horseman. The Dolian is a sign of death approaching, which is appropriate because when Ocoho stops and plants the stone for the Spectrum Nemesis to form, it's somewhat comparable to when a Dolian stops riding his horse. When they do so, especially in front of someone's home, it's death knocking. Mostly for people who are already dying, though. This panel right here perfectly captures the image of the Dolian, which is another point in design for having her skulls represent the headless part. Anyone who's watched Interview with Monster Girls, you know what I'm talking about. Am I right? Now, the Dolian in most stories is also known for having a spine as a whip and using it to blind people, but that's a bit of a gruesome sight, and that really hasn't been implemented into Oko's character, at least not yet to my knowledge, because upon writing all of this, it makes me think that Ocoho's infection is almost too perfect and straightforward for other people to take advantage of. Let me explain, and get your tinfoil hats on, it's time for some theory crafting. Again, I find it a bit odd that her infection is just so fortuitous for anyone to use against her. It's so easy to use, and what I mean is that compared to infections that we've seen in the series, they range just from being weird to more or less minor problems, like Taj always having a runny nose or Branguar having multiple nipples. Weird shit. But then there are those who take and make their infection an advantage for them. Queen Budokai uses her size for many things that help her. Opelion from the Dominors, and one of the coolest fucking characters in Radiant, his body releases excessive water vapor and he has to drain it out from his own body, but he takes it and freezes it with Fantasia, and he uses that against his enemies. And when it comes to the main squad, we don't really know if Seth's horns are his infection. Diabol points out that it really can't be due to how things work, and if it was, then he kinda got lucky if anything. From volume 13 and 16, Melee just doesn't have a double personality, she somewhat copies personalities. In Doc's case, we thought it was a pure inconvenience that he gets younger, but if he doesn't get killed, that means he's kind of immortal. The point I'm trying to make is that those aren't really super bad compared to Ocoho's. There's just a little bit of an upside that can be dealt with and can somewhat help you during your day-to-day life or more. I know you could say, well, Melee's is pretty bad. Not really, because it did help her in a life or death situation. Ocoho's is just terrible. There's literally no pros to it whatsoever, and from learning more about the main character's infections, it's almost like Ocoho's infection doesn't feel natural. And seeing that people can give other characters something akin to a curse, I feel like that's where Ocoho's character in past is headed if we happen to learn more. However, enough speculating, let me at least discuss the one thing about her, and that's how she's starting to somewhat abuse her powers. This is another thing that I enjoy about Ocoho. Even though I've painted somewhat of a perfect picture, since the start of the Bohm arc, the ethics of the Gessoni has come into question, and I think this is really engaging, because when it comes to life or death moments, teamwork is needed to make the dream work. But what if those who are on the team don't have or want the same dream? And in this case, what if Melee doesn't want to be reminded of the nightmares instead, which led to their friendship having a rift in it now? Or from the bridge encounter, Lupa fully disagreed and didn't give consent to this pseudo mind control as she sees it. And by the end of the volume, Ocoho has to remind both Lupa and Haydel that she can literally force them to do anything, and she doesn't want to have to do that. But the fact that she used it as a threat to begin with is rather telling of how dangerous the Gessoni is. Because, to my knowledge, there's really no counter to it. If your willpower or mind isn't stronger than the user, then you have to do what they say. And that's pretty twisted. I wasn't expecting Ocoho to start shifting towards the grayscale side of things. Fuck ethics, morality, and autonomy if it means you ultimately save others, right? You know what people say though. Consent is a myth. Because of this potential of a dark path, hopefully things don't get too crazy for anyone associated with Ocoho, and hopefully Ocoho doesn't become drunk or too overwhelmed with power against others. Right now, she's with a ragtag team of her, Lupa, and Haydel, and they're about to witness a slaughter done by a one-man army at the time of this recording. With everything that I've gone over, you can probably tell that Ocoho is one of my favorite characters in the series. Definitely second favorite, right behind Seth. And I mean, the original title, hell, I don't even know if I'm probably going to change the title of this video, since it's originally going to be How to Create the Best Girl, which she is, duh. Ocoho is that spunky, strong-head character that every series needs, and how she's executed here is an absolute delight. She is indeed best girl. And with that, that is the Ocoho video. I was not expecting this to be as long as I did, but, you know, again, there's a lot of things that are mostly speculation, so, you know, there's at least the time of me recording this and stuff, there's really no yes or no answer. It's just me making like these very thin connections and think like, well, it looks similar to that, therefore it has to be true. But till we get confirmation on that, you know, I'm just kind of speaking into a void, I guess. But luckily, when it comes to a series like this that no one really cares about, who's gonna correct me? Not really many people, and that's the best part. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. You know what to do with all the links that I provide and everything of the sort. Thank you for watching. That's greatly appreciated, of course. Have a great day, have a great night, and everything else, you know what to do. Bye.